Hello, I'm Daniel McCarthy, Vice President for the Collegiate Network at ISI and the editor of Modern Age. Joining me is Jennifer Frey from the University of Tulsa, where she's in charge of the new Honors College. Jennifer, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about the new Honors College at the University of Tulsa.
I would be delighted to tell you about it. So every honors college in this country, and there's just over 200 of them, was once an honors program, usually in a College of Arts and Sciences. And the exact same thing is true for the University of Tulsa. So we've had an honors program since 1979. And we've sort of, a little bit later in the game, made the transition to being a college. If you look at the history of the honors program over the decades, it has changed a lot. It went through it went through a sort of self-conception change in the mid-'80s. There was a massive NEH grant when it became more sort of great books oriented. And so that is the program that I inherited. However, it was a program that was kind of on its last legs for a variety of reasons. The University of Tulsa in 2019 had made the interesting decision to basically kind of murder the liberal arts. And part of that was this honors program. It didn't work. It didn't go down very well with alumni and donors. And so a new administration was brought in, and there was this decision made to turn the honors program into an honors college as a way of really recentering liberal learning on campus. And basically the idea was to create sort of a mini St. John's through the honors college. So I'm at the beginning of my second year, and that's the work that we have been doing. And it's been going really well. We've really focused on our curriculum first and foremost. So now if you are a freshman matriculating into the honors college, you will study the same books as every other freshman. And it's a 2-year great books core, 4 semesters. And basically it's like Homer to Hannah Arendt. And it focuses on sort of classic texts of the Western tradition. I think what's distinctive about our program is that we take the old-timey idea of liberal education. It's the education that befits a free human being and citizen. And we think that it comes with that, that you have to be developing excellent habits of mind and character, right? If you are actually going to be free. And so we're trying to sort of bring together great books education and character education. There's a really interesting movement that's been going on in the last decade to bring character education into the K through 12 space and now into higher education. And so that's really sort of our focus and our mission is through the study of classic texts to develop excellent habits of mind, of thinking, of reasoning, of communicating, but also working on what we call sort of those virtues of liberal learning. Because another aspect of our program is that we're a living learning community. So you're not just reading the same texts, you're living in the dorm, right, with other students in the college. And there's a whole student life experience that grows out of and is connected back to the curriculum and sort of the pedagogy and the mission of the college. And so we really work on virtues like civility, for example, as necessary for the common good of a community that is attempting to be liberal learners, right? And it's going really well. It's going really well in the sense that students are very hungry and excited for it. I always say to people that if you really want to understand our program, you really need to talk to our students. And they can tell you why they keep enrolling. something that I really love about honors education generally is that it's completely voluntary, right? Like nobody has to do it. And our retention rates are sky high relative to other honors colleges. And I think our curriculum is much more difficult. Like we really ask a lot of our students, especially in terms of the sheer amount that they're reading and the difficulty of the text that we're reading. So, it's great books. So it's interdisciplinary. They're reading philosophical, theological, literary, and historical texts, right? And it's just a lot. Like if you just look at the sheer volume of pages, it's an incredibly demanding curriculum. So why are all these students who are by and large STEM majors, right? These are not just a bunch of nerdy philosophers. They're by and large engineering or pre-med or in the natural sciences, something like this. Why are they re-enrolling? Like, why are they coming back? And when you ask them this question, which we do because we have surveys, the answer is that they really value, right, this experience of reading these great texts, asking one another these incredibly difficult existential questions that are at the heart of human existence and human society, and feeling like their education is maybe for the first time in their life more than just a means to an end, but something that's like good in itself and incredibly meaningful to them, right? And I think that's sort of the whole thing, right? And it's so interesting to me, it's not surprising at all, but it's still so interesting and fascinating to me that for them, this is a revelation. They've been in our education system their entire life. And for them to have a non-instrumental relationship to their education is a revelation.
Wonderful. So let's break down some of the elements of what you've just discussed. First of all, let's talk about what is the nature of liberal learning? What are the liberal arts and what is their place in the 21st century?
Yeah, so like I said, I sort of take a very old-fashioned view about it, and that is that the liberal arts are those sort of disciplines of study, broadly construed, that are worth doing for their own sake, right? So they're not, it's not a sort of vocational training. It's not for a trade or for some specific use. It's just for the development of yourself as a person. And really its goal is nothing more or less than sort of human flourishing, individually, but also collectively. And so I think, if you look classically at what counted as a liberal art, you'll find things that we still study. For example, music is a part of our curriculum. And they also tend to be things that in higher education today, but also education generally, tend to be sidelined or marginalized, right? They're sort of, if they're there at all, they're there in a completely secondary sort of way. So there's sort of like the content of what you're doing, but then there's also the way that you're doing it, sort of like your attitude and your sense of what the goal is in doing it. And again, I think the attitude in a liberal learner is totally different. And one sign of that is that we hope to graduate students who understand that when they graduate, their education is just beginning. Like it's not over, right? And I think for so many people, really their education is just, it's just a way to get the credential that you know that you need, to get the job that you think that you want. But there's really no thought about what it's for. Right? So like you want some instrumental good and it's really a good, right? You want money or you want power or you want social status, all of which are good. But like if you don't have some vision of what it's for, what's your money for, what's your power for, what's your ambition, what's your status for, I think you're not really educated, like in the fundamental sense. And so for me, the beautiful thing about an honors college in particular is that you have a kind of freedom, to really center liberal learning in this sense. And, I'm just hoping that it's a model that will be copied, right? I mean, I am certainly looking to models like St. John's, the Columbia Core, my first job, which was at the University of Chicago, teaching in Human Being and Citizen, which was their original Great Books core, which was totally transformative for me personally. I had never done that before, and it sort of made me a true believer. But I think in terms of sort of the future of higher ed and also the future of the so-called humanities, many humanities, I think, are not, it turns out, liberal arts in this sense. They've been instrumentalized as well in interesting ways. I think that our discourse around this kind of needs to be reimagined. And so we're trying to do that.
So is the concept of the great books one that is still viable in the 21st century, or are there so many claims to expand the canon or to revise it that it becomes very difficult to sustain? As you said, you have students who read a consistent set of books. They all have a experience that they have shared, and these are books that have, of course, as you I think mentioned, from Aristotle to Hannah Arendt. These are absolute classics. Yeah. But is this under siege now with the idea that the canon is perhaps too exclusionary, or that it hasn't changed enough to meet the needs or the desires or even in the understanding of flourishing of the 21st century? Well,
sure, it's under siege. It's been under siege my whole adult life, right? I mean, one of my earliest memories as a freshman at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana, go Hoosiers, is being told by a professor that my interest in Shakespeare was racist. And I just I couldn't believe, I just was so confused. I was like, wait, what? And they were asking us to read all of this stuff, which was super interesting, but that frankly I could read on my own. I didn't need help reading it. And I was like, but I need help reading Shakespeare. Right? I thought that was kind of what we were here to do, right? And so sure, it's under siege, but that doesn't mean that it's not good and worth fighting for. Now, I think when we look at the means for fighting for it, we need to be very careful that we get people to buy in. So when you talk about a canon, I think we do want to constantly be reflecting on what texts we are teaching. Something that I personally have fought for and will continue to fight for is the fact that it makes sense for our curriculum to be Western because we live in the West and our institutions are Western. And insofar as we want to deconstruct or critique or amend or whatever, we need to understand, right? Right. The reason that we are studying this particular tradition is that it explains, right, the very institution that we are in right now. And that there's nothing wrong about this. There's actually common sense. And that also there is tremendous value in picking a tradition, because when you pick a tradition, you see that the way that the dialectic changes throughout the centuries and the way that it builds while also changing, you see internal contradictions. And I think for students, it is again a revelation, right? That the Gospel of John and the genealogy of morals are in the same tradition as the Iliad. And that when you discuss these texts, you're having a conversation that is building on itself. I mean, the sorts of recursive discussions that we have where we're always going back and coming around. And the students love this, and they don't need to be taught to love it, or because they just sort of naturally see these connections. And so what you're reading as a sophomore, you're bringing in what you read as a freshman. And when you're a sophomore in the program, the conversations that you're having with the freshmen and vice versa, like, it's a baseline, right, for thinking and reasoning and trying to figure out for yourself, right, what you think is true, good, and beautiful. I mean, that's sort of the goal, right? Because as a human being who has to live a life and make meaning for oneself and make choices, you need to know, right, like kind of where you stand. And you don't really know unless you've seriously and habitually reflected on it, not on your own, right, but in community with other people, including the great masters from the past. And so, yes, studying tradition is valuable. Studying a canon is important. At the same time, if you look at our curriculum, I think you will find a diverse array of voices, and that was very intentional. So I think we can also have conversations about expanding the canon within the tradition, right? And that there's value in that. And I think that when you sit faculty from many different disciplines around a table for about a year, which is what I've been doing, and you say, hey, we got to come up with a curriculum. It's not only possible to do, I promise. You learn a lot. These are sometimes difficult conversations, and you're not gonna reach like universal agreement. And as dean, like ultimately, like I have to choose. But the curriculum that we came up with is a really good one. And that reflects a lot of reflection and conversation and argument, and that we are going to reevaluate every year. I'm never gonna, we're never not gonna have Plato and Aristotle. Like there are some things that are just never going away. But there are obviously just hard choices that you have to make. And, for example, Smith didn't make it into our curriculum. And it's painful to me. And I think probably we'll try to change that somehow. But, you have 14 weeks to get, for example, in our first class is the three ancient cities, Athens, Rome, Jerusalem. You've got to get from Homer to the Gospel of John. It's tough. And then in the second one, which we call the Long Middle Ages, and it's very long because actually it includes late antiquity all the way to the Reformation. You just have to make so many tough choices. And so nobody can look at our syllabus and say that it covers it all or that these are absolutely the best texts. I mean, you have to, at the end of the day, make hard choices. And for us, we always centered it around what kinds of conversations do we want our students to be having? And how do we see the text that we chose as creating, as the basis of those conversations? But obviously, other people come up with a different list, and it reflects slightly different, but also very difficult choices. So I sort of feel like a canon's important, a tradition is important, but you just have to recognize that there's a lot of flexibility in there.
What makes a great book great? And are there clear criteria for being qualified to be part of the canon?
Yeah, I think there are some. Yeah. So I think it should obviously be very influential. And it needs to have withstood the test of time. So, it still speaks to people today. And I think, you want it to hit on some home truths about human life. And that last criteria is probably the most controversial, right? Are you saying that like this book is true or so? Well, I mean, not really. I mean, think about the Symposium, for example, which is one of my favorite texts of all time. It's amazing. It's super weird in lots of ways, obviously. It's also brilliant. But what's fundamentally important, and the reason why it's on our curriculum, is that one, the form of the text and the content of the text are intertwined. So you learn something about literary form through reading it. But also it's just talking about well-ordered loves, right? And how a true education is about shaping those well-ordered loves. Now, this is an idea, right, that is so important for so long. And then at some point we kind of lose it a little bit, right? And so it's like, it's a text that is so fundamental and at the heart of the tradition. Or you can think of like the Confessions or the City of God or the Consolation of Philosophy, right? Which is like the bestseller of the Middle Ages, right? I mean, it's just everywhere. But I think all of these texts are orienting its readers towards things that are deeply important and matter, right? So, it's not, and this gets back to it being liberal learning. All of our classes are seminars, right? We do not lecture. We don't have PowerPoints. Like, we don't do any of that. We ban laptops. It is a guided conversation grounded in the text, right? And so this isn't a class where you come and you just take a lot of notes and you're learning a lot of stuff, right? You could learn a lot of stuff about the Symposium. I mean, I could just lecture and give you a lot of facts. But that's not our approach to it, right? Like, our approach to it is there's a set of questions here. Plato, right, is going to give you, does Plato ever really give you answers? Not really, right? But there's a framework here. And it's setting you up, right, for so many things that come after, so that by the time you get to Rousseau, right, and you're reading Rousseau on education, like, you have this basis for seeing the direction that he's taking things in. And so again, it's a kind of formation. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We are trying to engage our students in a kind of deep formation that they're going to take with them, no matter what else they study, no matter what career they choose, right? They're going to have that liberal foundation that I think is truly necessary. I mean, I really believe this as deeply formative and important for their lives.
What advice would you give to students who don't have the opportunity to join an honors college, perhaps at their universities or colleges, or who may not be able to take classes that will give them an exposure to the great books and to the liberal tradition of the West? What advice would you give to a student who is kind of on their own?
Yeah, well, it's so sad that so many students are on their own in this sense, and I really hope that starts to change. But I think that we're in a very different time now than when I was an undergrad in the late 90s, in that there's a whole kind of digital liberal learning landscape now. And I mean, this was sort of like one of the very few happy side effects of the pandemic, is that people started to hold a lot of these events online. You could, for example, join the Catherine Project, which is run by St. John's tutor, Zena Hitz. And they are running seminars all the time. So you sort of get the St. John's experience, but online, and in a smaller way. Like, you'll you'll sign up for a tutorial on Kierkegaard, right? Or I took a tutorial on ancient Hebrew, so biblical Hebrew. So there are those kinds of opportunities. There's Inter-Intellect now. I think there's a whole sort of like online salon kind of, and then ISI and AAI and various wonderful institutions are dedicated to offering summer programming. Now even winter programming, like there's J-term stuff. And that's a really great way for anyone to kind of supplement, go to an ISI seminar, go to an AAI seminar. There's a whole kind of landscape out there now that students can get connected to. I mean, there's not enough. I think there needs to be more. But I also think that nothing is really going to change in higher ed until students themselves are sort of demanding this sort of education. And so if this is something that appeals to you and you're hungry for, you should be very vocal about that. Because one thing I can tell you that higher ed administrators respond to is student demand. So, and I think, my experience is for a lot of young people, they are hungry for this, even if they cannot articulate it, right? It's sort of like they don't know what they don't know. But I do expect, I'm very hopeful actually about higher ed right now. And I do expect programs like this, they are growing, and I think they will continue to grow.
Is there a book or other text that you would recommend as a starting point to someone who wants to embark upon the adventure of liberal learning and getting to know the canon?
The Republic. I mean, it's sort of everything all at once, and I don't think it's that hard. It's long. If you, so maybe that's for like the especially ambitious student. Maybe for maybe a more realistic choice would be just Plato's Apology. Right. So I run a summer program for high school students, and that's where we start with the Apology. And they love it. They react to Socrates really strongly, and not always necessarily positively, interestingly. But yeah, there's no better way to get into the Socratic method than by Socrates. And so I think any of those short Platonic dialogues where you're also sort of learning dialectic by seeing how it's done, that's a great entryway.
Of course, the majority of the great books were originally written in other languages than English.
Yeah.
What do you look for in a translation?
Yeah, wow, that is a great and complicated question. I think it ends up being a variety of things, right? Because we're all constrained by hard realities, including budgets. I think for us, that it's funny because it's hard enough to get to a book that you agree should be on the curriculum. And then it's like a whole other stuff to get everyone to agree on the edition and the translation. And I think, honestly, you need to rely on experience, right? So, professors have taught these books for years. And so I think they have a really good sense of what editions, are the best ones, what translations work, and why. I'll just give you one example. There was a lot of discussion about the translation of Machiavelli's The Prince. And we went one way, and then we decided never again. So there was a lot of like, I told you so. So I think a lot of it's honestly trial by error, because there is a lot of pressure to go for something cheap. There's a lot of pressure to do that, but sometimes you really need to spend more money if a translation is really kind of that bad. And for some texts, it's easier. A really bad translation of Aristotle can just really wreck the whole thing. Whereas I feel like with Plato, there's more flexibility. And I think that just has to do with their different styles. And so, yeah, it's tricky. I think you have to respond to those sort of hard realities that you're working with, but also really rely on the experience of those that you're working on your curriculum with.
The Prince seems like a very good test case in what one might look for in a translation.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what was the first edition that you wanted to use? And then what did you decide was inadequate about that? And what did you finally decide on as a superior translation?
Yeah, so we went with the Penguin because it's cheap. And it's also very like portable, right? I mean, it's just sort of like easy to throw in your backpack. There was a convenience thing there. But really, it's an incredibly misleading translation. And so we ended up going with a much more expensive, less easy to throw in your backpack Mansfield translation. So that one was one where, as the one responsible for the budget at the end of the day, I was like, we're going to go with the Penguin. And I regretted it, So mea culpa, but I take full responsibility. But again, you're cross-pressured as an administrator generally, but because at least, because we ask our students to read so much, asking them to spend a truly exorbitant amount of money on books is not a happy situation to be in. So yeah.
Do you find that students these days are still equipped to read the volume of text that you want to present to them? We've seen a number of articles in a number of publications saying that students today, even at the Ivy League schools, are often not coming to class to begin with, not coming into college, prepared for a heavy load of reading.
Yeah.
And they haven't ever been challenged at this point. And so how do you find that your students at the University of Tulsa respond to such a heavy load of reading and of serious reading?
Yeah. I mean, some of them absolutely freak out and will just drop as soon as they see the syllabus. And we have some guardrails, so they have to sign a piece of paper. And usually I'll try to we're small enough that I can be come talk to me. And some of these students I can talk down off a cliff. It's mostly fear, right? These are students who have always gotten A's and they look at the syllabus and they're just I don't know how I can do this. But for those who stay, which is the vast majority of them, they are intimidated at first, for sure. But again, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else in the dorm is reading this. And I also think the fact that if you're struggling with a text, but you can talk to the person across the hall about it, and they've said something super interesting and excited, and now you're oh, okay, let me try again. But also, and this is again a benefit of being in honors college, is that we do attract very top tier students. And there is sort of, and these are strivers, they're highly motivated students. But we also provide sort of additional support. So we have a program officer who runs workshops on, how to manage this amount of reading. And also we provide opportunities for students to hold one another accountable, for their reading. I think one of the huge benefits of being a living learning community is that you can get students to motivate one another, especially upperclassmen motivating underclassmen. So we have a lot of sort of peer mentors within the honors college who are sort of cheerleaders, older students who are it's worth it, and you can do it, I did it. So I think there's a lot of that. I do think that however we respond to the fact that students aren't always coming into university study with the skills and habits that we would hope they have, that we do not lower our standards in response, that we sort of see the problem and figure out, like, it's our duty to figure out how to get them to where they need to be. I think it's a dereliction of duty and a horrible mistake to just lower the standards. And that tends to be the response, right? I just disagree with that fundamentally. There's a kind of tyranny of low expectations in education generally in this country that we really need to push back strongly against. And the most unfortunate part about it is that it's filled with good intentions. You know, people are like, oh, certain groups just can't do this. And people don't see that you are writing them off to begin with, and you're holding them back from reaching their full potential rather than doing your job, which is to educate them, right? I mean, that's your job. And maybe it's a little bit harder now, but it's still your job. And I also just, the truth is the students can do it. They just need to have not only the right support, frankly, in many cases, they need to have the right attitude about it. You know, and this is where we get back to the nature of liberal learning. It needs to be more than just a hoop they have to jump through. It has to be something that connects with them personally and that they are able to make meaning out of. And frankly, I think that's where we're really failing them, is that we have refused, for a variety of reasons, all of which are bad, to really give them a meaningful liberal education.
That's a wonderful note on which to end. I think the return to the highest expectations and therefore the highest standards is precisely what we want to see. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.